I was 35 years old when I inherited the property. Everyone will say that a small apartment is better than a big house in the village. My grandfather had a hut in the taiga. I remember it well. Its roots are imprinted in me. My grandfather hunted wolves. Wolves had to be artificially reduced in these areas. In those days, my grandfather was paid for such work. He could handle the carcasses any way he wanted. When I grew up and could hold a gun, I started hunting with my grandfather. The house in the taiga gave me indescribable joy. The river is not far away. I dip my hands in the water, rub them against each other, and they seem to crackle. Since I was young, I've done my part to reduce the number of wolves. Unfortunately, my grandfather is long gone, but the memory of him is kept in my gun and, of course, in my heart. The house is mine now, but it's a long way to get there. Besides, I'm always busy. With the birth of my daughter, it's become even more of a chore. When Susie was 4 years old, I suggested to my wife that we go to the taiga and enjoy nature. We packed our things and set off. On the way, we visited relatives. The night was not enough to remember everything in the world. My father's brother warned me that people are moving to the cities and no one is shooting wolves. There are more wolves than ever before. Keep an eye on the family and the hut. We arrived early the next morning. Susie looked around curiously. The cabin was intact and standing bright and proud. The first thing we did was fire up the stove. In one of the rooms, we unpacked and settled in. My daughter was delighted and explored every corner with her little fingers. My wife and I stayed up late into the night. I told her about our adventures which happened to us in the taiga in that distant era. In the morning, I woke up refreshed. The fresh air had done its job. I made myself a cup of coffee and went out on the porch. The frosty air hit me in the face. Watching the steam from the cup, I noticed some movement. Suddenly, I saw a she-wolf looking at me with brown eyes. Putting the cup down, I ran into the house and grabbed my gun. I yelled to my wife not to come out. My heart was racing. I watched the she-wolf and from time to time shot at her when she came out into the open. However, the situation changed. The cubs joined the female wolf and continued their escape together. With the arrival of the cubs, the female wolf slowed down a bit so as not to leave them behind, like a real mother. They say that animals are more human than we humans. I kept shooting. With each shot, the little wolf jerked sharply and accelerated for a few seconds. After 10 minutes of pursuit, I was exhausted. Then I stopped shooting to catch my breath. Luck. The she-wolf and her little wolves ran out into the snowy meadow. I saw a huge wolf on my left. I froze. In the eyes of the wolf, I saw the whole range of feelings that a man can experience. He realized that I could kill his female and little wolves. I shuddered under his gaze. Maybe I was afraid to be far away from my grandfather's log cabin and surrounded by 2 wolves and their cubs. I stood for a minute taking aim, then I lowered my gun and returned to my own. The next evening, we decided to leave. I started putting the house in order. My wife and daughter went outside for some fresh air. Suddenly, I heard my wife screaming. I ran out of the hut and saw my wife in a terrible state. She was shaking with fear and tears were coming to her eyes. Only 5 meters away from the hut stood my daughter, and 3 meters away from Susie stood a huge wolf. I didn't know what to do. Before my daughter got hurt, I had to run up to the wolf and strangle it with my bare hands. That's the thought that came to me at that moment. I thought I was going to faint or have a heart attack, but the wolf looked at me, then at my daughter. Then he turned around and disappeared into the woods. My wife grabbed my daughter in her arms and carried her into the house. I was left standing outside in my sweater. I looked at the departing wolf and thought that yesterday I was aiming at his family. I realized that animals are much nobler than people. The wolf could have easily deprived me of my favorite human being, but he didn't. That day I was in the skin of a wolf. That's how our little adventure ended. Since then, I no longer take weapons in my hands and do not hunt the wild animals of the forest.